Good evening, and welcome to Skep Talk, the monthly speaker series hosted by the Bay Area Skeptics. Before tonight's presentation, a few words about Bay Area Skeptics. As North America's oldest skeptical organization, we are dedicated to promoting critical thinking, logic, and rational thought. In the 1970s and 80s, scientists such as Carl Sagan and magicians such as James Randi established the scientific skepticism movement out of concern about the popular fondness for pseudoscience and the lack of public science literacy. Scientific skepticism embraces evidence-based civil discourse on health, education, consumer protection, and especially the investigation of extraordinary claims. Using the scientific method, we hope to promote skeptical inquiry to reduce irrational thinking in society. This talk is supported by Bay Area Skeptics members such as you. Please visit us at baskeptics.org or join us on Facebook, Twitter, and Meetup. Consider supporting us through convenient monthly donations via Patreon. Patrons receive premiums such as discounts and free t-shirts for our annual Skeptical Conference. But more importantly, members help us make the world just a little more reasonable and rational. And now, tonight's speaker.
Good evening. I'm Eugenie Scott. I'm your host tonight. Now, those of you who are frequent viewers of the Bay Area Skeptics Skep Talks will remember that last year was the 100th anniversary of the Scopes trial. And we had a number of Scopes related events and talked about evolution and various kinds. And it was a lot of fun, for me especially. But one of the things that I did when I wasn't hosting the Skep Talks is I attended a lot of conferences about the Scopes trial, one of which was held at Vanderbilt University in Tennessee, where, of course, the Scopes trial was held. And it was quite wonderful because one of the speakers there was an old friend of mine, Wesley Roberts, who gave a talk on science education and defending the teaching of evolution and combating creationism in Tennessee over many, many years of being a science teacher there. And it was wonderful to see him, and it was wonderful to hear his talk, which, you know, I assure you, there were a lot of extremely eminent people presenting papers at that very scholarly Vanderbilt conference. And Wesley wowed them all. It was just so much fun to hear his talk. So clearly it resonated with me, and I thought it would be a very good idea if Wesley could come and give us a Skep Talk. So I leaned upon our longtime friendship and invited Wesley, and he was able to speak tonight. So I'm very excited about that. Wesley Roberts holds a bachelor's in science in biology and also a Bachelor of Science in Secondary Education from the University of Memphis. And he has a master's in education from Vanderbilt University. He has won awards for his science teaching, and he's taught for 38 years in Nashville, Tennessee. In addition to being an enthusiast of the Scopes trial and knowledgeable about that subject, Wesley also is a passionate defender of evolution over many, many decades in the state of Tennessee, which I assure you has definitely had its experiences with the teaching of evolution. And he's going to tell us about that tonight. So Wesley, so glad to see you again after having had a chance to see you last summer. And thank you for speaking to us at Bay Area Skeptics. And we will now buckle up, which is the title of your talk.
That's right. Well, thank you very much for having me here. I am always thrilled to give a presentation, especially that involves teaching evolution in the state of Tennessee. So if we're ready, I'll go right to it. Okay. I am very proud to be a Tennessean. I have lived here my entire life, 70 years. I went to public schools when I was a child, graduated from a public high school, went to a public university, and then got my master's at Vanderbilt, as Jeannie said. And I have spent a lot of time contemplating the theory of evolution and also embracing the rich history that Tennessee has of opposing evolution. My embracing that was more in the form of trying to stand up for the theory of evolution. So what I wanted to do is share some of the history of teaching evolution in the state of Tennessee. And of course, I could not do this without having some references to the Scopes trial. So whatever you know about the Scopes trial, it's a fascinating event, and I will share just a little bit of that with you tonight. So we'll start with, let's see. Jay, I'm sorry, it is not, oh, let's see, how about that? It's not advancing. Oh, I know what's going on here. There we go. Okay. In the state of Tennessee in the early 1900s, some interesting things were happening, that led up to the 1920s. In 1919, Tennessee became the 36th state to ratify the 19th Amendment, which was women's suffrage. So I am very proud of that. It came down to what was called the War of the Roses in the Tennessee legislature. The legislature had 48 representatives who had voted against it, 48 representatives who had voted for it. The ones who opposed it wore a red rose. The ones who were for it wore a yellow rose. Harry Byrne was a representative from Nyota, Tennessee, and he had voted against it. He was wearing a red rose, but his mother wrote him a letter and said, you need to be a good boy and vote for this. So he went in and changed his vote, and changing that vote meant the 19th Amendment passed, and 27 million women were afforded the right to vote at that point. Tennessee also had two different movements going on. One was the movement of modernism, and the other one was the movement of fundamentalism. So that takes us to the fear of modernism in the state, and especially in the state legislature, where you can see from this editorial cartoon that modernists were feared because they were leaving Christianity. They were realizing the Bible was not infallible. For example, New Social Sciences had said maybe it's not demons possessing people. Perhaps it's mental illness that is something happening in the brain. But you can see all the way down the staircase, no virgin birth, no deity, no atonement, agnosticism, and into the pit of atheism. Now, there was a state legislator named John Washington Butler, who in December of 1924 was quite afraid that the theory of evolution was going to harm young people in schools. And he also, and this is a continuing theme, he was dissatisfied that taxpayers who were paying for the schools were not able to say no teaching evolution. So he came up with what became known as the Butler Act. And the Butler Act said it was unlawful to teach any theory that denies the story of the divine creation as taught in the Bible. There was a little bit more to it than that, but he took it to the legislature in January of 1925. The House passed it. The Senate did not pass it, with a lot of opposition from Vanderbilt University. So the next thing that really shook the legislature was this man, Billy Sunday. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of him, the professional baseball player turned evangelist. He had a revival in Memphis in 1925 in which 200,000 people attended over a period of 18 days. During that time, that is 10% of the population of Tennessee, and he had a great influence on the state senators, especially the senators from West Tennessee. He then brought his revival to Nashville and to Knoxville, and he was preaching very much against evolution. The godforsaken, hell-bound bastard theory of evolution was the way that he termed it. He also called his rallies in Nashville and Knoxville the Three Crosses. Now, I have not misspelled that. That was quite intentional that they called it the Three Crosses. You can imagine that's also three Ks. And that brought the Klan in, which is still a presence in especially in the South. And during that time, he denied that he was a member of the Klan, but thousands of Klansmen came into came into his rallies, and they swore their loyalty to Billy Sunday and his 100% crusade to Jesus Christ. So that swayed a lot of the senators in the state in the state house, in the state legislature. And in 1925, the Butler Act was passed. It was signed by Governor Austin Peay. Even though there were a lot of protests against it, Governor Peay signed it and said that he basically thought people would ignore it and it would never amount to anything. Well, of course, he was quite wrong about that. Because one of the next things that happened was the ACLU, which was a fledgling organization in New York. It had started in 1920. It put advertisements in 4 Tennessee newspapers: Memphis, Nashville, Knoxville, Chattanooga. And in that advertisement, they said, we need a teacher. Now, as we go into the Scopes history, there is so much to be said, and I will not do a whole lot of that. I'm just going to give you some of the highlights that I feel like will lead into some of the other things that we'll be talking about. And mostly it's personal experiences that I've had regarding the Scopes trial. So in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925, there were some town leaders that got together. And when they saw that advertisement, they said, hey, wouldn't this be great? Dayton had gone through some economic rough times. And so they said, well, why don't we see if we can find somebody who's in Dayton and bring the trial to Dayton and have a big economic boost. So the Ray County Central High School was just down the street from where they were. And they said, well, what about the biology teacher? No, he's the principal. He's got a family. We don't want to put him on trial. Well, what about that young Scopes fellow? So they sent somebody down the street, and he was playing tennis at the high school. He comes back to where at Effie Robinson's drugstore where they were meeting. And they said, can you teach evolution, or excuse me, can you teach biology without teaching evolution? He said, no, it's too important. And they said, well, would you be willing to be this teacher? And John Scopes said, well, okay, sure. And that he had no idea how much his life was about to change. He was a first-year teacher. He was from Kentucky. He was very popular with students in the town. And he also had been teaching chemistry, physics, and coaching football, which obviously does not include biology. But he had substituted for the biology teacher in April and reviewed for the exam. So he said he might have taught evolution. He didn't really remember it, but with huge events taking place over the next few months, the Great Monkey Trial begins in July of 1925. And Dayton, Tennessee has never been the same since. It turned into a big carnival. Dayton has about 1,500 residents at that time. The town hosted thousands and thousands of visitors, and they were all just having a great time. They had so many street corner preachers that they had to put up a schedule on all 4 corners of the courthouse so that they weren't trying to shout over each other. Effie Robinson's drugstore made lots and lots of money, which had been the point of bringing the trial to Dayton, Tennessee. He also sold lots of brochures called Why Dayton, of all places, sold out of them immediately. Just everybody was just rolling in the money and having a great time with it. Now, I was fortunate enough to get to read H.L. Mencken's commentary on it. H.L. Mencken, the acerbic Baltimore Sun editorial writer, and he was not very kind to the city of Dayton. He also someone compiled all of his writings in this book called A Religious Orgy in Tennessee. He wrote about going to a holy roller meeting in the mountains and described that in great detail, and basically gave us several terms that are persistent to this day. One is he coined the term Bible Belt over this, and he also was the first one to call it the Scopes Monkey Trial, which is what it is absolutely known as today. As I was studying the Scopes trial back in the 90s and the early 90s especially, I did meet a woman who you see pictured here as a little girl. Her name was Frances Robinson at the time. She was the the daughter of the drugstore owner who helped bring the trial to Dayton. And when I talked to her, I said, her name was Gabbard at that time. I said, Miss Gabbard, tell me what you remember about the trial. And she said, well, I don't remember much, but I remember the monkeys. So many people brought monkeys to Dayton, Tennessee, and that's what the little girl remembered. This monkey, or excuse me, this chimpanzee's name is Joe Mendy. He was a very popular, I guess, almost a movie star at that time. He is sitting in Francis's mother's lap, and he's drinking out of a glass. And after he drank out of that glass, Mrs. Robinson put that glass up on the upper shelf behind the soda fountain at the drugstore and told everybody there they should never drink out of that glass again because a monkey had drunk out of that glass. Now we'll come back to Mrs. Robinson a little bit in a little while, but basically the strategies were pretty simple for the Scopes monkey trial. The first one was, did Scopes break the law? That was the strategy of the prosecution. And did he? Well, maybe. We weren't really sure. He wasn't really sure, but that didn't seem to stop them. Everybody was fine with going ahead with it. The strategy of the defense was, is the law constitutional? And they showed the judge in 13 different ways how the law was unconstitutional. Every single time the judge ruled that it was okay, that it was constitutional. So there wasn't really a whole lot to go on. But back to the question, did Scopes break the law? There are several accounts of what happened to get around that. And my favorite one is from, it was actually verified by one of the Scopes experts this past summer. But on the morning that 3 of the students, the Scopes students, were supposed to testify, then the story is that Scopes took them out and sat in a taxi cab and taught them the theory of evolution so that when they got onto the witness stand, they could say, yes, Mr. Scopes has taught me the theory of evolution. And that seemed to satisfy everybody. Everybody was in on it, and nobody was worse off because that had happened. Well, eventually the verdict is handed down, and of course I'm leaving out so much of it, especially the debate between Brian and Darrow, but there are plenty of historical accounts of that. You can read hundreds of books on the Scopes trial if you like. The verdict was, of course, that he was guilty, and he was sentenced to pay a $100 fine. After that, people left. The press left. H.L. Mencken had left before the weekend before and didn't even get to see the debate between Darrow and Brian. But and unfortunately, a few days after the trial, when Brian was in Dayton, he died, and so there was quite a bit of grief over the end of the Scopes monkey trial. But eventually, it made its way to the state Supreme Court, which had been Darrow's plan in the first place. And in 1927, the verdict was overturned. It was overturned on a legal technicality. The judge had set the fine, not the jury, and therefore they threw it out and said, we hope to never see this again, basically. And pretty much the state Supreme Court never did see it again. The law did stay in effect, though, for the next 42 years. Now, the Scopes trial's enduring legacy is something that I have testament here for you. One thing is that it is considered a standard of comparison. People talk about the Scopes trial all the time. Still 101 years later, we're still talking about the Scopes trial and its enduring legacy. And I have a video clip from one of the most important jurists of our time to show what the standard of comparison is.
Listen, this is not the Scopes trial. It's also not the trial of the century. This is worth $100. That's what.
And of course, the irony is that the Scopes trial also was worth $100. I don't know that Judge Judy knew that at the time. Another important enduring legacy of the Scopes trial is the establishment of Bryan College. As soon as William Jennings Bryan died, people started raising money to build a college in his honor, and it sits on the hillside overlooking Dayton, Tennessee today. One really interesting thing about Bryan College is that every college faculty member has to take an affirmation of faith. They updated it in 2014, and as you can see here, it is the belief that all humanity is descended from Adam and Eve. They are historical persons, and they are not from previously existing life forms. If you can't take that affirmation of faith, you cannot be on the Bryan College faculty. So we'll return to that in just a little while also. That takes us into the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and all the way into the 60s that the law was still in place. And I don't have a whole lot of data about what was being taught. I do know that only one other teacher was ever fired over the Butler Act, and that helped to bring about its repeal. But one person who I knew very well and was my mentor at the University of Memphis, Robert McGowan, just a wonderful man. He and I remained close friends until his death in 2017. And he said that pretty much nobody in that department at the University of Memphis was worried about the Butler Act. He taught the theory of evolution without apologies in any way, and did so for his entire career. And he said that the theory of evolution is like turning on a light so that you can understand the rest of biology. Just a wonderful man, and had such a great influence on my life. Another educator of the 1950s, and a little bit before that, was Frances Gabbert. Now, you remember her as Frances Robinson, the little girl. And when she was interviewed by NBC, she had this to say. She had become a biology teacher at Ray County Central High School, where Scopes had taught.
Everyone doesn't believe the creation story.
Frances Gabbert was a little girl in the courtroom when Scopes was convicted. She later became a biology teacher herself and gave her students a choice.
They could believe that their ancestors had hung by their tails in trees, or they could believe the creation story.
Well, I think you can tell which one that she was a proponent of. Now, that will take us to the 1950s is when I was born in 1955. And I was the fourth of five children. And I bring this up because I grew up in quite the fundamentalist home. Every Sunday we went to church without fail. In the middle picture, I'm the guy in the sporty plaid jacket. That's Easter. We definitely went to church on Easter. My father said even the heathens go to church on Easter, but we were there every single Sunday. So the fundamentalist upbringing that I had was quite influential. When I was in fifth grade, I was ready to be the next Billy Graham. I wrote to him and got all his pamphlets and didn't really read them, but I was sure that I was going to be saved and I was going to save the world. Fundamentalism is, I'm sorry, I forgot. When I was baptized, then my grandparents got me this King James version of the Bible with my name imprinted on the front. And I was determined to read the whole thing. I got through about 3 chapters of Genesis and realized I couldn't understand a word of the King James version, so I kind of abandoned it. But obviously, I still have it. Fundamentalism has such an interesting origin. It was in the early 1900s that pamphlets were very popular. People would give out pamphlets, and a series of 12 pamphlets known as the Fundamentals gave us the term fundamentalism. And you can see what those 5 things are. The Bible is inspired. It's without error. Christ's death was atonement for the virgin birth, the historical reality of miracles, and the bodily resurrection of Christ. All those things, you had to fervently believe those to be a fundamentalist. And I did. My family did. And my family taught me that those were absolutely undeniable and things that needed to be done. In 1957, things began to change as far as people's attitudes towards science with the launching of Sputnik. People were afraid that we were about to lose out in science education to the Soviets. I don't remember that. I was only 2, but I do remember as a kid in elementary school being quite afraid that the Russians were sending out radio waves through Sputnik to turn us all into communists. So I was pretty scared of that. Fortunately, I don't think that happened. But as a result of that, then Americans got a little bit smarter about their sciences and started the biological sciences curriculum studies. When I started teaching in 1986, teaching biology in 1986, then the course was still called BSCS, and it used the theory of evolution as the central organizing principle of modern biology. Good. It was things were starting to take place, but the reaction of the anti-evolutionists was swift, and they came up with scientific creationism. This is a textbook that I found in my classroom when I started teaching at Hillwood High School here in Nashville. This was also in my classroom. These were being given to teachers all the time, trying to get them to insert creationism into the biology curriculum. Finally, in 1967, the Butler Act was repealed, very much as a result of a man in Jacksboro, Tennessee, which is up in East Tennessee, being fired for teaching evolution. And the legislature got together, and really without a whole lot of fanfare, they did repeal the Butler Act. It was approved and signed by Buford Ellington, the governor, in May of 1967. I was in sixth grade at the time. And even though I had not heard a lot about evolution, except that I was supposed to be opposed to it, my science teacher, Miss Qualls, came in the day after it was passed, after the Butler Act was repealed, and she put on the board a timeline that showed dinosaurs and showed people. And I don't remember the accuracy of it, but I was very impressed that this teacher was now talking about this taboo subject for me. And it really helped me to open my mind up and say, maybe there's a little bit to be understood about this. There I am, just such a cute little guy, 12 years old, and enjoying my science class. That takes us to just about 6 years later, when the Genesis Bill was introduced in the Tennessee State Legislature. The Genesis Bill was one of several that were going around in states at that time, and it was supposed to allow for equal time for evolution and creation. I didn't really think about it very much at the time. My friends and I did talk about it, but as you can see from this picture of me, I was much more interested in other things at that time. We decided that it would be kind of weird. We knew that there was a lot of information about evolution, and there were 2 chapters about creation. So it was hard for us to understand how there would be equal time given to evolution and creation. And again, I didn't pay that much attention to it, but the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State filed a lawsuit, and the decision was handed down in 1974 that the Genesis Law was proclaimed unconstitutional. Now, after that, that pretty much takes us into my college years. I went to college and majored in biology and really started understanding a lot more about the theory of evolution, such that I was not scared of it anymore. And shortly after that, I began teaching. And in my teaching, by the year 1988, pretty much right after Edwards versus Aguilar, then the Tennessee Attorney General sent this memo to all the biology teachers in the state that said, you can teach any scientific theory of origins, including evolution, but you cannot teach anything that is religiously based. And that was our law for a pretty good amount of time. It seemed like a good thing to me. And so that was pretty much what we were doing. I had read the book Lucy by that time, and I was getting very, very interested in especially human evolution. And then here comes the spring of 1995. Scopes monkey trial was 70 years old at that time. I got caught up in it. Vanderbilt had several symposia about it. I went to Dayton during the festival. Dayton has had a festival almost every year since the trial, starting in about the 1950s. And I became hooked on the Scopes trial. I became so obsessed with it that I bought a copy of the transcripts, and I took the transcripts and condensed the last 2 days, which included the famous Bryan and Darrow debate, and turned it into a play for students that I would start every school year with and say, this is how science works. And we act out the Scopes monkey trial. And the kids actually just really, really enjoyed that. So they learned a lot about scientific thought and about how science works. And it was such a nice thing to do. It was also at the Vanderbilt Scopes Symposium in 1995 that I met Kurt Wise, who was a professor of biology at Bryan College. I thought it was very courageous of him to arrive at Vanderbilt, but he turned out to be a really nice guy. I'm not sure how well you can see that, but basically, this is a statement of his when he was teaching at Bryan College. He had studied and gotten his PhD at Harvard under Stephen Jay Gould. And Stephen Jay Gould talked about him as he said he was just a very nice guy, and they had different ideas, but that was okay. But one thing that in this statement, if all the evidence in the universe turns against creationism, I would be the first to admit it, but I would still be a creationist because that is what the Word of God seems to indicate. So I don't know that there's much you can talk about after that. No matter what the evidence is, he's still going to believe in creationism because that's what God wants him to do. Again, there's not much arguing about that. But it was at this symposium also that one day, this was later on in the year, that somebody brought in this. Now, you might think, well, what does this have to do with anything? Well, this copy of Playboy, this December of 1995, if you'll notice at the bottom, it says the religious right goes ape over evolution. And they brought it in specifically because this article called Very Weird Science starts with an interview with Professor Kurt Wise. And I wish you could have seen Kurt Wise's face when somebody brought it in. He had not seen it before. It had just been released. And he was, let's see, ashen maybe would be a good term to describe what his face looked like at the time. But he took it in stride. Everybody was having a good time with that. And it was a very interesting article. It was true that I went out and got a copy of this Playboy for the article. Now, if you read on in the article, you'll just love this, because this was the first time that I had ever been introduced to someone called Eugenie Scott. She was mentioned in this article. So the first time I ever heard of Eugenie Scott was when she was featured in Playboy magazine. Now we go on, back up just a little bit from the month of November when that took place. But in August of 1995, there was a Metro Science Teachers in service, and the director of science education said to all of us at the science conference, every biology teacher needs to go to this particular session. And this particular session was in the big auditorium. There were probably about 100 of us in there. And these two gentlemen got up, and the first thing they did was give us a copy of this book of Pandas and People. If you are not familiar with this book, I will tell you it is the introduction of, or it introduces the concept of intelligent design. Now, I was all over this, and first thing I said to him was, you have just handed out thousands of dollars worth of textbooks. Who sent you? And they would not tell me. They said, we are doctors from Hendersonville. And I do believe that they thought once they said we're doctors, that all the biology teachers would just cower and say, oh, these guys, they're doctors. We have to believe everything they say. But I pressed them on it. I said, come on, who sent you? And they never would tell us. As you may be aware, that this book about intelligent design ended up in the 2005 Dover Panda Trial. The reason it's called the Dover Panda Trial is because of the book of Pandas and People. And I still have my copy of it. When Judge John Jones, who presided over the Dover Panda Trial, came to Vanderbilt University last year, I took it up to him and proudly had him autograph my copy of it. Also, John Delancey has a play about the Dover Panda Trial. He came to Vanderbilt, and I took it up to him and said, will you please autograph my copy? And he was a little taken aback, but he was such a good sport about it. And he wrote in there, every word a travesty, John Delancey. So I was very happy. I have that book. Maybe one of these days you'll see it on eBay. After that, in the spring of 1996, when I really thought that things were just probably kind of calming down from that, then Senator Tommy Burks of Monterey, Tennessee, introduced what became known as the Monkey Bill. And in this, he had been concerned, his secretary had told him that she knew of some students in Monterey, Tennessee, who had received low marks because they wouldn't profess a belief in evolution. I don't know about the accuracy of that, but at any rate, Senator Tommy Burks, a Democrat from Monterey and a very well-loved politician, came up with what became known as the Monkey Bill, which said, no teacher shall teach the theory of evolution except as scientific theory. Any teacher teaching such theory as fact commits insubordination and shall be dismissed. Well, this immediately became a national news story. And it was really fun for the state of Tennessee to get all this 71 years after the Scopes monkey trial, to get all this information about evolution and having the legislature come up with it. Now, it was not a great thing for our state, but at the same time, it was a lot of publicity. And when NBC came to Tennessee, they interviewed several people, including me, but this is a little bit of Tommy Burks. This will give you a good idea of what Tommy Burks was all about.
And no one is saying you can't teach evolution.
The bill's author, Senator Tommy Burks, says the state had to step in now because of what he sees as a breakdown of family.
There's not the guidance in a lot of homes to even contradict anything that's taught in school.
You're recognized on Senate Bill 3229.
A controversial bill by Senator Tommy Burke sets new guidelines for teaching the origins of man.
All that it does is what it states, the one line, that the teachers in the schools would teach it as theory, not as fact.
In the Senate chamber, Senator Tommy Burke of Monterey is at his desk early, pondering how to keep alive his evolution bill, weighted down by committee amendments designed to scuttle it.
We're saying that if it is fact that you originated, you're a descendant of a lower species. And that's what it amounts to.
Even since the Scopes trial, people now readily admit that there have been changes in species over...
For an hour and a half went the debate.
If you believe in God, then you believe that he created man and the universe.
We need to vote the bill down because it's unconstitutional, and that's what everybody's forgotten about.
The last gentleman, Steve Cohen, is now a representative in Washington. He represents the city of Memphis. And the Senate spent hours and hours and hours debating this. Also, there was a companion bill that was introduced into the House of Representatives by Representative Zane Whitson. And here is a little bit about Zane Whitson when he was interviewed by ABC.
Some people disagree, but I think it's only a tale, a guess.
Representative Zane Whitson and many Christian fundamentalists believe evolution contradicts a literal reading of the Bible, the idea that humans were created in the image of God. So Whitson has introduced a bill which would order teachers in all grades to label evolution as a theory or guess or face dismissal.
This will help children to be able to make up their own minds about creation.
Would it bother you if evolution wasn't taught? If some teachers skipped it?
Well, I can't say it would, no. Students feel like that they're overgrown monkeys, or that's the way they evolved instead of the image of God. That has a lot to do with their self-worth, their self-esteem.
With this bill, are you trying to bring religion into the classroom?
Well, I would not deny that. I would say that, but it's only fair. As I mentioned, we have rights too. People that believe in God and believe that man was created in the image of God, we have a few rights. And this is a very small step.
So that was the kind of rhetoric that was going on at the state legislature at that time. And there was also at least one person who opposed the monkey bill and did it quite publicly. And that person I like to think of as having the face of the monkey bill. And of course, that was me. It was actually, I have to say that it was really, really fun that every day there were reporters coming in, CNN, ABC, NBC, the New York Times. The New York Times was just a wonderful experience for me because there I am on the front page of the Sunday New York Times next to George Burns's obituary. And you can see that they're still talking about 70 years after the Scopes trial, the creation debate lives. That was quite a moment for me in my life to get to be on the front page of the New York Times. My sister married a guy from Brooklyn, New York, and he was an avid New York Times reader. And so when she brought him over to my house one day, I said, look at this. This is me on the front page of the New York Times. He looked at it and said, oh yeah, below the fold. And I kind of never got over that, but it was okay. My sister eventually divorced him. I also got to be on in the USA Today. This was page 3. But if you'll check this out, I think that I have more area than Brian, Darrow, and Scopes put together. And so this was quite a moment for me too, to get to be in the USA Today in a major newspaper with these 3 historical figures. And I thought, wow, this is very, very, very cool for me. Now, there was also another 1996 Monkey Bill opponent who made the national news in her opposition. And of course, I'm talking about Eugenie Scott. And this is what she had to say.
This is an anti-evolution measure because it's going to scare teachers off from teaching it.
Eugenie Scott is executive director of the National Center for Science Education.
Many teachers are going to be put off by this. Many teachers are going to be inhibited from teaching evolution because they'll be worried that a kid will complain. Mrs. Brown taught evolution as a fact today. Let's go get her.
Well, the opposition was pretty strong then, and we were really happy to have Eugenie Scott and the NCSE on board with us. There were several problems with the monkey bill, as you can probably guess. The first was the definition of theory. I like to use the definition of theory, scientific theory, as an explanation of a set of facts. The legislators clearly did not understand that definition. They thought a theory was a guess. If Tommy Burks had written the bill as hypothesis, not fact, it would have made more sense, but it still wouldn't have been a very good piece of legislation. There was also a problem of textbook revision and how much that was going to cost. It was going to cost several $1 million, which there was no accounting for where that money would come from. So our state legislature did a very bold thing. They just completely ignored that and kept advancing the bill forward, even though the Tennessee Constitution has 2 articles that expressly forbid something like this. The first is that the legislature is required to cherish literature and science. When you're outlawing the teaching of evolution and threatening to fire teachers over it, that's not exactly cherishing science. The other is that we have an establishment clause. So there's not supposed to be an establishment of any religion by the state legislature. Well, eventually the monkey bill came to the Senate floor. And
with Tennessee school children looking on, senators wrapped up 2 days and more than 5 hours of debate on a controversial bill governing the teaching of evolution. Senator Tommy Burks has spent months trying to require public schools to teach evolution as only one of a number of competing theories about man's origin.
You believe that you descended from a lower species? I don't.
I know Senator Burks feels strongly about this bill.
Burks' chances of passing his bill looked good until powerful Lieutenant Governor John Wilder told his colleagues he believes in the biblical story of creation, but would still vote no.
Maybe I shouldn't have done this, and maybe some of you don't understand what I'm saying, but I do know what I'm talking about. God is great.
That led other religious conservatives to abandon the bill, and it failed 20-13.
So the monkey bill was dead. The monkey bill was defeated in March of 1996. And several outcomes of that, it was a victory for those of us who were opposed to it, except that it was kind of bittersweet for me because the American Civil Liberties Union had already said to me, you get to be the one who goes on trial. I was set to be the next John Scopes, and I was so excited about that. So when people said, aren't you excited? Aren't you relieved that this bill has failed? And I would say, yes, I'm relieved. And I didn't want to say, but now I don't get to go on trial like John Scopes. But anyway, I took it. I took it well. And the other thing was I didn't realize that it was going to be a temporary setback, that there was more to come in my career. The other thing that happened shortly after that was the sad story of Tommy Burks, and I will get to that in just a moment. But there was a reporter from Channel 5 News in Nashville who said to me on that day, hey, your 15 minutes of fame is over. Is there anything that you would like to say that you haven't been able to say yet? And I said, thank you so much. Yes, here is what I've wanted to say all along.
Roberts feels the bill created so much controversy because it asks us to decide who calls the shots on planet Earth.
Are we going to perceive ourselves as creatures that were specially created, placed here, and given dominion over everything on the planet such that we're the rule makers? Or are we going to look at ourselves as part of a world of nature that has rules for us that we must obey?
I was so happy that he had asked me that because in my core belief system, that is what I believe to be one of the most important things about teaching the theory of evolution. Now, the sad story of Tommy Burks. Tommy Burks, again, he was very loved by his constituents. He had been a senator for quite some time. He commuted 2 hours every day to go home to be with his family after a legislative session. He was up for re-election in 1998, and he was being opposed by this man, Byron Looper, who actually legally changed his middle name to parentheses, low tax, parentheses, close, Looper, so that his name would appear on the ballot as Byron Low Tax Looper. Now, Byron Low Tax Looper didn't have a chance of defeating Tommy Burks, and he knew it. So unfortunately, in October of 1998, he drove out to Tommy Burks' farm on a Sunday morning, pulled up next to Tommy. Tommy was in his pickup truck. Byron Looper was in an Audi, pulled out a gun and shot him dead right through his head. Byron Looper went to Arkansas immediately, went to his friend's house and said, his words were, "Hey, I popped a cap in that dude's head," and asked his friend to help him. Well, his friend helped him by calling the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation and testifying against him at his arraignment. Byron Looper was found guilty of first-degree murder. He died in prison in 2012. But there was a problem, and that is that by Tennessee law, the ballot could not be changed in October of 1998. So on the ballot was Tommy Burks, who was dead, and Byron Lotax Looper, who had murdered Tommy Burks. Now that's going to be a big problem. So the people of Monterey and the community got together and said, we have to do a write-in campaign. Who can we get? And they came up with the best solution, and that was Mrs. Tommy Burks, or Senator Charlotte Burks, as she became known. The write-in ballots worked. She was elected in 1998 and served as a state senator until 2015 when she retired. She was there for the next anti-evolution bill, which came up in 2011. I will get to that in just a moment, but for the years that I was teaching evolution in the classroom, there were several strategies that I found to be quite successful. And one of them was to try to get everybody comfortable with the idea. I would start the year with, on a scale of 1 to 10, where does your evolutionary thinking lie? And then I would give a slip of paper to the students. They would get to write what their opinion was, and then take it up to the whiteboard and tape it up to the whiteboard, such that it ended up looking like this. This was in August of 2014. The second period class with 24 students. I had them do that. They would go up and tape their where their number would fall, and then they would get to, if they wanted to, explain why they thought the way that they did. In February of 2015, after I had done a unit on human evolution, and remember, in a biology class, you talk about the theory of evolution every single day. In February of 2015, we did the same thing, and you can see that they started shifting their papers over towards the evolution side. There was another class that had a much more dramatic shift. It went from this configuration to this configuration, where a lot of people got on board with it. I felt like an evangelist at that point. And then there was this class, which I never could figure out this group. If you notice that they're just all over the place all the time, that was pretty much their MO the whole time that I was teaching them. Now, there was also, throughout my experiences in teaching, there was also some classroom opposition. For example, one day, this young man started asking me some really good questions that were probing into the theory of evolution. And I said, where are you getting these questions? And he showed me this book called The Handy Dandy Evolution Refuter, that this author, who has a PhD, was giving prompts, what you're supposed to ask your teacher. And it actually worked out well for me, because every time he came up with something, I would say, oh, well, that's because of this and this. And it turned out to be actually a really good lesson. So I was glad to embrace the Handy Dandy Evolution Refuter. The other thing that I faced a lot was parents. So I came up with several strategies for dealing with parents. The first one I called Hit 'em in the Pocketbook. A woman called me, and she had 2 daughters in 2 of my classes, and she was adamantly opposed to having them hear anything about the theory of evolution. So I said, yes, ma'am, that's no problem. I can send them out of the classroom when I'm teaching this, if that's what you want. And then I said to her, but you should know this, that when they go to compete for scholarships, when they go to compete for college admission, if they don't know anything about the theory of evolution, then they are going to be at a distinct disadvantage with other students. So you might want to rethink this. And at that point, she said, oh, okay, all right. And she said, they can stay in there. But another parent who had the same problem, even though I told her about that being at a disadvantage, she said, no, I don't want my daughter in there. And so I said, okay, well, I'll write her a pass to the library. The very next day, she came up to me and said, are you teaching about evolution today? I said, yes, I am. And she said, well, I need to go to the library. I said, no problem. I wrote her a pass. She went to the library that day. She came back the next day. She never asked me again about leaving the room while the theory of evolution was being taught. And again, it's taught every single day. But she was able to say to her mother, yes, I went to the library. I didn't stay in there. And she actually made a really good grade, especially on the human evolution test. The last one is just such a good success story. And there was a young man who was applying to Carson Newman College in East Tennessee, which is a Baptist school. And he was a very religiously conservative young man. He didn't like the theory of evolution, but he did study it and made straight A's. When he went to take a scholarship competition test at Carson Newman, the question, it was about human evolution. And he knew so much about it that he not only could write well about it and refute it, but he won the scholarship and ended up getting a full ride to Carson Newman College. That was a great success story as far as I was concerned. Now, that takes us to the legislative session of 2011. And these two members of our legislature, Dunn and Watson, Bill Dunn, they're both still in the legislature. The Representative Bill Dunn is now a senator, and they came up with this, which is a boilerplate kind of law that was introduced in many states at the time. But basically, if you'll notice, what it says is that teachers may be uncomfortable when it comes to subjects like biological evolution, chemical origins of life, global warming, warming, and human cloning, and they may not know how to present the information. So they were going to tell us how to present this information. And basically what they said, if you look at the orange, respond appropriately and respectfully to differences of opinion about scientific subjects. So they were ready to bring a lot of opinion into the classroom. This became known as the Teach the Controversy bill. There was a lot of opposition to it and a lot of committee meetings. One of the committee meetings was the House Education Committee meeting, in which Dr. Molly Miller from Vanderbilt University spoke. And I think it gives us a really good idea of what was going on. Please give this your attention.
The science topics or issues listed as controversial in the bill are not scientifically controversial. They represent the best scientific explanation of natural phenomenon, and they are mandated in these science standards. Let's consider quickly two theories that are accepted by almost all scientists. One is atomic theory, the idea that the atoms are composed of protons, neutrons, and electrons, and the other is evolution. Neither one has any competing scientific theory that's really strong. I can't imagine that this legislative body would take time to debate whether or not there's atoms are made up of protons and neutrons, or if there's some better explanation. It's not a controversial theory, and it's not a controversial scientific theory, and neither is evolution.
The response was from Representative John DeBerry, and it was immediate, and I will show you that. Representative John DeBerry is no longer a member of the legislature. Now he is the senior advisor to Governor Bill Lee of the state of Tennessee. And this is what he had to say about Molly Miller's testimony.
Thank you very much. I think Representative John DeBerry, do you want to be recognized at this time?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've sat through this issue this year. The only people that I see opening the door to evolution, or debates against intelligent design and so on and so forth, are those who are coming in saying that if we don't think as you think, that we're a bunch of idiots. And I'm taken back from it. And you're very clear about what you said, because you voice your if clauses very, very carefully, very, very academically, and in such a way that, as usual, academians coming in saying that anybody who does not agree with them is some type of idiot. Now, I do take issue with that. I have the floor now. I find it offensive that you will come in and walk in this body, and whether I agree with you or this legislation or not, that you present yourself in such a way that you're saying that you, first of all, you put two things in front of us. You put the atom in front of us, you put evolution in front of us. It don't take a rocket scientist to know that you're talking about an exact science, and you're talking about something that is a theory. And whether or not I agree or vote for this legislation or not, I take offense with people coming into this body, into this committee, and presenting your opinion which is exactly what it is, which is as good as my opinion, as though just because you have prefixes and suffixes on your name that all of a sudden you are some type of standard. And I find that offensive.
When I showed this to my class, shortly after this happened, a student turned to me and said, "Mr. Roberts, why are people who don't have degrees in education or in biology making decisions about what we can do in here?" And all I could say was, that's a really good question, and I don't have an answer for that. But I also was privileged enough to get to testify to the Senate Education Committee at the same time. And I would like to play for you just a little bit of my testimony.
Madam Chairman, members of the committee, thank you. I'm Wesley H. Roberts. I currently teach at Hume-Fogg High School. It's currently the top performing high school in the state of Tennessee, and I hope that impresses you. I have been teaching for 29 years, and most of my career, including now, I've been teaching biology. So then I ask again, what is this bill trying to accomplish? As stated, the bill's wording mandates schools to, quote, respond appropriately and respectfully to differences of opinion about controversial issues, end quote. Is this a mandate to allow any idea, no matter how scientific or non-scientific, into the classroom? If so, this bill mandates the discussion of Fan Ku, the Chinese creation myth, in which fleas become humans, and the controversial idea that lunar eclipses are caused by a giant serpent swallowing the moon. Do we have time for this in science classes in Tennessee? However attractive it may sound to have discussions of non-scientific ideas in our science classroom, it is not the souls of our students that are at stake here. What is at stake is how they will perform on standardized tests in which they will be compared to other students across the state, the nation, and the world. I have been a reader of national advanced placement exams for the last 7 years, and I can most assuredly state to you that there has not been, nor will there ever be, a question on the AP exams that asks students to discuss a controversy in non-scientific terms. No question is stated. Compare the merits of intelligent design to the scientific principles in the theory of evolution. There has not been a prompt directing students to explain their knowledge of creation myths from China or the Middle East. Indeed, AP science exams do not ask students for their opinions or to explain controversies. They ask students to demonstrate their knowledge of scientific principles, including evolution. So what does this mean for the student? It means that if time in science class is wasted on topics that are not part of the stated curriculum, they are losing out in the competition with other students in other states. And we allow teachers who represent our state to change the mandated science curriculum framework at will. Does this help our students as they take the state mandated end of course exam that has no questions about controversy, but asks many questions about accepted scientific theories? Does this help them to compete on a national and global scale to understand the consensus of the most learned scientists throughout the world? It does not. It presents science as a democratic process in which anybody's opinion, no matter how non-scientifically based, counts. And science does not work that way. Science is a process that deals only with logic, reason, and proof. So please, let's stick to science and only science for the benefit of our students.
And I would love to tell you that my testimony stopped that bill. And actually, maybe it did, at least for that year. It came up again in 2012. And in 2012, the Senate passed it without much fanfare, without advertising it very much. So that was the law of the land, and still is the law of the land in the state of Tennessee. So, of course, I ask why all the fuss, and it's about sticking with science, and it's important to our future. It is important to our students. And with that, I will share this with you. If you are interested in reading my just condensed transcript of day 7 and 8 about the Scopes trial, I've got it on my Google Drive with this QR code to get there. It also has a link to the Vanderbilt Scopes Symposium if you're interested in that. And also, if you would like to continue the conversation, or if you can't get this QR code and would like for me to send you a link to this page, then I would be glad to do that. You can email me at scopesteacher@gmail.com. And with that, I thank you very much. Please feel free to contact me at any time.
No, we thank you. Thank you, Wesley. That was really fun. I also am a big fan of the Scopes trial, and it seems that anytime I hear anybody talk about the Scopes trial, I learn some other little tidbit that I didn't know before.
There's
and
so much to know.
You gave me a tidbit, which was
Good
really
deal.
fun. I took notes.
Good deal.
I didn't know that H.L. Mencken coined the term Bible Belt. Somehow
Yeah.
that had passed me by.
Yeah.
Scopes himself was a very interesting character. And at that Vanderbilt symposium, I learned some very interesting things about Scopes from
Yes.
Randy Moore, that
Yeah.
his later life was, you mentioned that his life was marked by the Scopes trial.
It was.
In many respects, he went for many years without, mentioning it or trying to avoid the publicity and so forth. But eventually he did have to embrace it.
Well, and he didn't really want to. I think that he probably would have been happier to continue teaching, but there was no way that he could. They were willing to take him back in Dayton, but he went to the University of Chicago. And then later in his life, he actually struggled greatly with alcoholism. When the movie Inherit the Wind was made, he did not attend the screening, the premiere at the Dayton Drive-In movie. And he tried to distance himself a little bit later on in his life. Of course, he did start to embrace it somewhat. There's on YouTube, you can see him on To Tell the Truth, where there's 3 people claiming to be John Scopes. And that's a pretty fun thing to see as well. But yeah, if I had gotten to go on trial for being the second John Scopes, it could have had a negative effect on me too. So I guess in many ways, I'm pretty grateful that didn't happen.
Well, you served plenty of important roles in defending evolution in Tennessee. So even if you didn't end up on the witness stand, or even if you did not end up being the titular Scopes 2, as it were. I had not seen a lot of, I'd seen some of that footage, including me with very short hair and very big glasses a very long time ago.
The students would always comment on your big glasses when I showed them that. After the 90s, when the big glasses were.
They were highly fashionable at the time.
At that time,
actually they're coming back, which is weird.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to go back to that. I might cut my hair.
And how about that mention in Playboy? I bet that was something you were really proud of, right?
In my bio, and something that, you list awards and things like you do. You have awards, and I have awards. And one of the awards that I received was the Hugh Hefner First Amendment Award.
Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, congratulations.
And you would be surprised. This was back in the 90s, of course.
Yeah.
And you would be surprised how many people, when they say, well, we need to introduce you, send us a vita. Okay, here's a vita. Generally, I just send a little paragraph like you sent me.
Yeah.
But sometimes they just want the whole resume. So what the hell? I send them that. And that always gets into the introduction, because there's always this, whoa, what's going on? And, when I got that Hugh Hefner Award, of course, the one-liners just kept flying in, and just everybody emailed me. And the best one-liner that I recall from that was from Rob Pennock, the philosopher of science who testified at Dover and was so enormously impressive and effective. But Rob, he just sent this one-sentence email saying, "What are you going to wear?" But I digress.
That's
in all seriousness, though, the footage that you showed from the 2011 session with Dunn and the college professor that he was
Molly Miller
addressing.
Yeah.
Wow.
John DeBerry was his name. And again,
DeBerry, excuse me.
Senior advisor to Governor Bill Lee in the state of Tennessee, which gives us pause. And the state legislature, what Mark Twain said was, no man's life, liberty, or property are safe when the state legislature is in session. Well, this legislative session, our legislature, fortunately, just this week voted down a bill that would have called for the death penalty for women who have abortions. Now, that's how far to the right they have swung. It's quite extreme, and fortunately, there are a lot of good people in Tennessee who are opposed to this. 40% of the Tennessee votes more progressively or mostly Democratic. 60%, the tyranny of the majority is on full display here in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
But I do love Tennessee, and there are really good people here, many good people. So
Absolutely.
I'm sticking around. They need my vote.
No, I spent many years in Kentucky, and so I'm pretty familiar with that part of the country. And there's some wonderful, smart and passionate people there, and it's really great.
Yeah.
But reflecting back on that exchange between the legislator and the college professor, that is just the quintessential example of how people with PhDs, shall we say, the science community, can be so enormously misunderstood by legislators or people who have an axe to grind, I guess. And it's very, very, and I'm not saying that he was duplicitous or that didn't feel passionately and was expressing a real emotion that he felt, because I've run into many people who take that attitude that, well, because you have a PhD, you're lording it over me and you're trying to tell me what to do and what to think. And I'm not an idiot, but she wasn't treating him like an idiot.
No.
There's just no way.
She was quite eloquent and made some very good points. He really just didn't understand when he said one's an exact science and the other's a theory. He just really doesn't have an understanding of how science works.
But it reminded me once again about the importance of having teachers being involved in these kinds of controversies, because teachers speak normal language. They don't come in, quite honestly. They come in with the respect of the community, because they're teaching my kid, and my kid thinks this guy is a really, whatever. It was really a great teacher, and I went to see her during back to school night, and I was very impressed. And so when that teacher gets up to testify, that is a biggie. That is very impressive. Yeah. And when I was working at NCSC, I always tried very hard to be sure that there were plenty of teachers up there on the podium. Scientists are helpful too, but ministers and teachers are the ones who win your battles.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
During my testimony to the Senate committee, afterwards, I asked the TEA representative to tell me what those senators, how many of them had been paying attention, because I noticed that most of them were not. Most of them were either on their phone or on their laptop. And he said, well, there were 12 of them in there, and 5 of them were paying attention. The other 7 were not. A couple of them even got up and left during my testimony. So it was pretty clear that they were not interested in hearing what I had to say, even though, I wasn't a PhD from Vanderbilt coming in. I was a teacher in the classroom, and I was hoping that they would hear that, but they really didn't.
You're talking to more than one audience. If you're lucky enough to get cameras at your hearing, that's highly significant, because at that point you're talking to the general public. And one thing that elected representatives at the legislative level or even at the local school board level, one thing they have to pay attention to is the public. So, obviously, it would be much better if the elected officials are the ones who are listening and are, but sometimes you have to do that off stage. Sometimes you have to do that off stage. But never underestimate the effectiveness of a teacher in situations like that. I could talk with you all night. We've talked all night before. It's unfair for me to monopolize you. Let's see what kind of questions the people watching us on YouTube have. And Jay Diamond starts us off with the first question. Can you tell us more about the approach of scientific creationism?
Scientific creationism is pretty much what they were saying in the Scopes trial, that there was a geologist named George McCready Price who had written a book about flood geology. So what they were trying to do was bring scientific credibility into the creation story. Intelligent design was just warmed over scientific creationism. There's not much science going on. That I did have a speaker in my after school session one time. We used to have a lot of creation evolution debates after school. And he was a very interesting guy, but he started off by saying that it couldn't possibly be that fish fossils were accurate because when fish die, they float instead of sink to the bottom. And so he was trying to make some kind of point about, well, this is the scientific explanation, and anything that other scientists come up with, they're just trying to promote the theory of evolution. So at any point, I wanted to say, okay, they float until their air bladders explode and then they sink to the bottom. But it didn't matter to him. He was just trying to make his point. So scientific creationism is trying to bring in a smattering of scientific principles to bolster creationism, and it really just doesn't work.
Which, of course, they contend would justify their being taught in the public school science class, because it's an alternative science. And of course, it's not science, but even if you really squint hard and define science in ways that hardly anybody ever does, it's really bad science. So why should you teach kids bad science?
Well, that's right. And to present it as an opinion, a consensus of opinions, it's just, that just doesn't work. So unfortunate.
This gets back to that exchange that I'm so traumatized by between the legislator and the scientist.
Yes,
because the T word made its appearance, right? Theory.
The T word, yes.
And because she very correctly, in the scientific stance, talked about atomic theory and evolution theory. And he, of course, said, well, evolution is a theory. Well, atoms are real, kind of thing. No, they're both theories in the scientific sense. But, by the time you unpack what the word theory means in our context versus what it means on the street, people have sort of, they're dozing off anyway.
Yeah,
so
this is true.
I can go for months without mentioning theory.
It's probably a good idea. In 1996, when Tommy Burke's bill came up, then Steve Cohen, the guy who's currently the only Democratic representative from the state of Tennessee, since they gerrymandered the Nashville Democratic representative out, but he had added some amendments that said you can only teach the theory of gravity as theory, not fact. You can only teach the theory of planetary rotation as theory, not fact. And they eventually eliminated those amendments, but he was very definitely trying to say, look, here's the point. Scientific theories are not just guesses. This is what we're dealing with.
Exactly. May we have the second question, please? NorCal skeptics, actually in disguise. This is my very good friend, David Allman Smith, and I will out him right now. He says, today, do students who reject evolution on religious grounds consider fellow students who accept evolution as atheist?
I would say, and the majority would not. But when I was doing the number line on the board, I felt like that really brought everybody together to say that it's okay for me to have, I hate to use the word opinion, but it's okay for me to have this opinion. Now let's go ahead and study about what evolution really is. There were several out atheists in the classroom, and that was often not well received. If they, like I remember a young man saying, as he put his number on 10, he walked back and said, I don't believe that there's some big magic man in the sky. And there were several gasps in the classroom. But at that point I said, he gets to say that because we're talking about what everybody's ideas are. And, let's explore that. Let's don't be afraid of anything here. I would say that they probably don't delve that far into it, and mostly they just want to be accepted by each other. So I was able to start a free thinkers club at my last high school, and that was pretty fun because after school we would get together and have some really interesting discussions. And I was pretty interested in how many out atheists there were in that particular high school. It was an academic magnet high school, and a lot of the kids were very open about their lack of religious belief.
Next question, please. I'm sorry, I can't read that very. Gwen Olson asks, in this strange political time, are there any states with hotspots challenging the teaching of evolution in this country?
Actually, I read that today in the state of Colorado, there was a teacher who was teaching creation alongside of evolution, and it was taken to court and struck down by a judge. So I would say absolutely. And Jeannie, you know more about this than I do, because there are hot spots, especially around the South. I would say that Mike Kohut did a study at Vanderbilt in which he was surveying teachers in Tennessee, and he found that there were a huge number of teachers who just don't mention evolution at all in their biology class. Yeah. In fact, the teacher next door to me, a wonderful teacher, excellent teacher, really fine person, she would not use the word evolution. She would say biological change. And it was simply to avoid the controversies that might have come up about that. So yes, absolutely. There are hot spots around and hot spots within communities where one school's approach to teaching evolution may be very different from the other. When I was at Hillwood, there were 3 or 4 biology teachers, and for many years, I was the only one who did a unit on evolution itself.
Yeah. I'm not surprised.
There's
a huge amount of variation from one part of the country to another, and even within the same part of the country, and even within the same city,
even within the same school.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. If you are curious, anybody listening to this and would like to know what is going on in terms of anti-evolutionism and efforts to sneak creationism or intelligent design in, if you go to the National Center for Science Education's website, my old stomping grounds, ncsc.edu. No, wait, that'll work. NGO, they have a ncsc.ngo. And if you search, they have a weekly newsletter that they put out that is very informative. I've been retired almost a little bit longer actually than Wesley has. So I am not au courant when it comes to the creation and evolution controversy, but NCSE is. And I've found that those weekly newsletters are extremely informative. It's usually just a couple of paragraphs, but they do talk a lot about legislation. And they also, of course, cover climate change nowadays and anti-climate change legislation and efforts. So evolution and climate change is NCSE's beat, so check them out. Can we have the next question, please? Scott Snell asks, do you have an opinion about Gould's non-overlapping magisteria?
Well, not really. I do have some fun Stephen Jay Gould stories. But non-overlapping magisteria, non-overlapping magisteria. If I'm recalling correctly, this is keeping the two ideas in separate containers. But after my, I'll go ahead and tell my Stephen Jay Gould story. After my appearance on the front page of the New York Times, I sent him a copy of that, and I sent him a natural history magazine in which this view of life was having its 200th column. And he did, and I asked him to sign it for me, and he did. And he wrote in there to Wesley Roberts, thank you for doing the real work in evolution education. And I was quite moved by that, to be honored by Stephen Jay Gould. But if I'm recalling that correctly, then sure, let's keep them in two different categories. That's okay with me.
They have different goals. Religion and science has different goals. They're not trying to do the same thing. It always made sense to me. Next question, please. Stuart asks, have any of these court cases included the introduction of scientific evidence such as DNA and the clear and logical conclusions of long-time heredity and, second part of his question, the evolutionary distance of the various branches of the huge tree of life and the close proximity of other primates to us humans?
Well, I can speak about the Scopes trial. Since DNA was barely known at that time, it was known as a nucleic acid. They did have discussions about the tree of life. William Jennings Bryan made fun of the idea that man was a mammal. So I think that they were not really understanding that. But I'm sure you know more about the Dover Panda trial, and I know that DNA evidence and all kinds of evidence came up in the Dover Panda trial. Not so sure about McLean versus Arkansas and Edwards versus Aguillard, but please share with us what you know about the DNA evidence in the Dover Panda trial.
Well, you're right. And of course, with Scopes, they had this whole raft of scientists, geologists and physicists and biologists and other authorities, other scholars who were all poised to speak, but then no scientific testimony was allowed. I mean, there were, occasional references, as you say, Brian brought up the Tree of Life, but the actual scientific testimony that the Scope side certainly wanted to present just was outlawed by the judge. But the two trials in which there was a substantial amount of scientific data presented is the McLean versus Arkansas in 1982, and also Kitzmiller versus Dover in 2005, the intelligent design trial that my organization had a hand in. And in both of those, the science of the time was definitely on display. In McLean, you had, in fact, Stephen Jay Gould talking about the fossil record. And see, I don't know that they had anybody specifically talking about DNA and genetics, but they had a lot of science, including geology and physics and the whole works there, anthropology too. And then, of course, in Kitzmiller, we gave them all the barrels. You can't say both barrels because we got more than one. Right. There was quite a bit of evolution, quite a bit of molecular evolution. After all, the lawyers got the press, I should say, got very sick about hearing about the bacterial flagellum, which they were bored to tears with by the time we got.
I'm sure they were. Yeah. I will say that in the trials, bringing that evidence up was allowed. In the state legislature, they were not interested in that. In fact, I felt like they were not interested in the testimony at all. They had made up their minds they were going to pass this bill, and they did. So I don't know that bringing any of that evidence into the state legislature would have had any effect at all.
Agreed. In a court of law, though, you're under oath, and you have to present evidence, and you can challenge evidence, and it's a more level playing field than many legislative hearings, of course. But legislative hearings are pure politics. We have one last question for you, Wesley. Jay asks again, did you feel a lot of pressure or get a lot of threats / pushback when you had all the media coverage?
Actually, it was mostly fun. I got letters from all over the world from people who were writing in, mostly in support. I remember one letter that came from Indonesia. It was from a retired U.S. military man, and he said, "I support what you're doing, but you need to dress more formally when you are teaching." And then one night after, when in the midst of the 96 controversy, and when a story ran on the local news, then this was in the days of phone books, and not many people had a cell phone. So somebody looked up my name in the phone book and called me right away after the newscast, and really just said, this is just terrible what you're doing. I just don't understand it. And I said, I understand what you're saying. And if you feel that way, I'm going to give you information on how to contact the Institute for Creation Research, and they can help you to try to lobby your legislators to get bills passed and things like that. It's not really going to be up to me about about what comes out of this. And actually, by the end of the phone call, he was very nice. I never heard from him again. But that was one of the only things that I had the day that the bill was voted down in the Senate. I was supposed to be on a radio show. I believe it was somewhere in the West, and the guy called me and we were getting set up for it. And I said, okay, now I just want you to know that today the Senate voted that bill down. I just want you to know that before we do this radio show. And he said, they did. Oh, forget it, and hung up the phone. And I thought, well, this is really the end of my 15 minutes of fame. But for the most part, people were supportive. Fortunately, at that time, I had a very supportive principal who was happy for me to keep doing this. Yeah.
Well, Wesley, you have a wonderful story, and we thank you very much for sharing it.
Thank you for having me. I really
it was a ton of fun.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay.
So everybody else, wait for just a moment. I want to tell you about next month's talk on April 9th, same time, same station, same YouTube channel at 7:30 p.m. Geologist Susan Hoff will be speaking about ghosts busted, the science behind ghostly encounters. Now, it turns out that this distinguished geologist has investigated ghost sightings and has a geological explanation for certain kind. So if you have ever heard tales, and actually Wesley was telling me that there's one in Tennessee, of ghostly figures walking down railroad tracks with their lanterns, searching for their lost, deceased loved ones, this is the talk for you, because there is a very plausible scientific, geologically based explanation for such phenomena. So please join us next month, April 9, for a very interesting talk on ghost busting geological style. See you then, and thanks very much for listening to us tonight. Good night.